Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. I'm Liz Cohen. I'm the Dean of the Institute, and I'm delighted that you could join us for our conference, Crossing Borders, Immigration and Gender in the Americas. This conference is the culmination of months of planning, outreach, and organization, and I'm very excited about the day that lies ahead of us. A warm welcome, too, to those online who are watching us through our website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. Crossing Borders tackles a complex topic that is frequently, particularly in recent weeks and months, on the public radar screen. Anyone who lived through the last week in the Boston area was aware of what a hot-button issue immigration currently is. But despite all of this attention, the impact of immigration on the lives of women and children is rarely discussed. In politically driven debates that too often generate more heat than light, the daily challenges faced by families who make the momentous decision to leave their native countries in search of food, shelter, safety, or simply to have a better life are easily overlooked. Today, those challenges will be our primary concern. Along with our conference chair, Mary Waters, whom I will introduce to you in a moment, a large number of faculty drawn from departments and centers across Harvard contributed to planning today's conference. We are tremendously grateful for the time and expertise they willingly contributed. Although immigration is by definition a global topic, early in our planning, the organizing committee decided to focus on immigration in the Americas. We began the conference last evening with a panel discussion between scholars and the bilingual rock band Quetzal, whose music is deeply tied to the cross-border immigrant experience in Mexico and Southern California. Today, our panels will feature speakers from a wide range of disciplines and professions, as well as home bases across the country. They contribute a wealth of scholarly expertise, professional knowledge, and personal experience to our understanding of the unfolding drama of crossing borders in the Americas. On behalf of the organizing committee and all of us at the Institute, I want to thank our participants for accepting our invitation to join us here today. And I want to point out that our audience is pretty spectacular as well. I took some time and some care studying the list of registrants, and I was blown away by the breadth of who you are and what you do. You are sitting next to neighbors who are students and faculty from all of the Boston area, social workers, lawyers, doctors, psychologists, activists, filmmakers, editors, artists, diplomats, and I could go on. I urge you to talk to your neighbors during our breaks and to learn from each other as well as the panelists. We have a crowded schedule. To allow time for interaction among the panelists and with you, the audience, we have asked participants to give relatively brief formal remarks. Then following each panel discussion, we will first open up the question and answer period to our conference speakers, giving them an opportunity to converse across panels and areas of expertise. I hope this approach will help us maximize our learning from this incredible group of speakers. Then, as time allows, we will take questions from you. Please write your questions on the index cards that have been distributed. They'll be collected by someone who will go up and down the rows. Before we begin, I want to thank everyone who contributed to the enormous effort that has gone into making Crossing Borders possible. Faculty, students, and staff from across the university, and a number of Radcliffe Institute fellows contributed to today's conference and to the robust calendar of events that has accompanied it. More information about those events is available in your program. Special thanks to Patricia Martin Sanchez and Donna De Cesare, whose photographs are on display in a powerful exhibition next door in Thay House. And that exhibition will be available to you to see and enjoy during the reception that will follow the day's panels. And we hope you'll join us for that as well. And finally, thank you to Rebecca Wasserman, Director of Academic Ventures at the Institute, and to her full team who organized this conference. to the Schlesinger Library for its exhibit, Stepping Stones for New Americans, which is now open on the first floor of the library, which is just 2 doors down. I hope you'll visit that as well. And to Radcliffe staff in events, facilities, communications, and development, without whom this conference would certainly not have been possible. Now I will turn things over to conference chair Mary Waters. Mary is the M.E. Zukerman Professor of Sociology at Harvard University. She has taught here at Harvard since 1986. Her work focuses on the integration of immigrants and their children, the transition to adulthood for immigrant children, intergroup relations, and the measurement and meaning of racial and ethnic identity. Currently, Mary is co-directing a study of survivors of Hurricane Katrina. She is a gifted author whose recent books include Coming of Age in America, The Transition to Adulthood in the 21st Century, and The New Generation, The Children of Immigrants in Europe and North America. Mary's lengthy resume would take up too much of the day, and we don't want to spend it that way, but I do think it is worth noting that by her own account, her interest in immigration and ethnicity grew out of her own coming of age as a young woman in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, and from listening to the stories of her immigrant grandchildren. Here it is again: gender, family, immigration. I am deeply grateful to Mary for her impressive guidance in making crossing borders a reality. And now, with deep thanks, I turn the podium over to her. Mary.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, this is quite a pleasure for this to finally come together. We've been working on planning this conference for a year now, and as Liz mentioned, we brought together an amazing group of faculty from around the university, from the medical school, the law school, the education school, the Kennedy School, arts and sciences, the design school. Immigration touches every aspect of our society. And there are many people across the university working on this issue. As Liz said, I have been working on this throughout my career and thinking about it since I was a child and heard the stories of my family and how we came to come to the United States. And I think that Americans in general are quite ambivalent about immigration. We're quite proud of our immigrant ancestors and quite proud of ourselves as a nation of immigrants, but quite worried about the new immigrants who are always arriving. And I think that that ambivalence runs deep in our society. And right now, we're at a critical crossroads. There are 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. That is about the same number of African Americans who lived in the South under Jim Crow racism before the Civil Rights Movement. These 11 million undocumented people have virtually no rights and live in constant fear of deportation, of families being torn apart, and they are part of our society in almost every way, except for having the civil rights that we all share. But in addition to the plight of undocumented immigrants, which we will hear about a lot over the course of today, immigration is much wider than that, and it's not often reported in the newspapers that we also have done an amazing job of integrating an awful lot of immigrants who come to our society and who are part of the fabric of our society and who are doing quite well. And so we'll also hear about that today. So it's important to keep in mind that there are both impediments to immigrant integration and also great success stories that we should think about and learn from. And I think we'll hear about those today too. I too am very grateful, especially to Dean Liz Cohen, whose leadership of the Radcliffe Institute has just been fantastic and who has brought together, Harvard is often a siloed place in which I know that there are scholars working on topics that I'm concerned about, but they're in different parts of the university, and we never meet. In fact, sometimes I meet my colleagues who are interested in immigration at conferences in California or London or Paris, but never in Cambridge. And Radcliffe functions as a place where we can come together and share our intellectual concerns and also share them in a way that brings in the community. All of you here today who will share the scholarship and the thoughts that we have today together and learn from each other. And so I'm just deeply grateful for this opportunity for us all to come together and for the support of the wonderful Radcliffe staff who have made this conference so fantastic. So with that, I would really like to begin the conference by introducing our first speaker, Sonia Nazario, who is the Pulitzer Prize winning author of Enrique's Journey. And if you haven't read it, it is just a page turner and a fantastic story of coming to America and of the immigrant journey. And we're just so pleased that she can be with us today to open our conference and to set the tone for the many things that we're going to study today. And her full bio is in the program, and so I won't go into all the details, but she's just a fantastic person, and we're just so glad to have her here today. So, Sonia.
Thank you very much to Dean Cohen and Mary Waters and the Radcliffe Institute for having me here today. Many of the academics in this room I have interviewed and you have informed my work, so thank you. As a child of immigrants, people who are willing to uproot and leave everything that they know and love for the unknown, I thought I knew something about determination. I mean, this was just part of my DNA, who I am. My father's family, they left Syria to go to Argentina. And my mother's Jewish family, they fled Poland before World War II to go to Argentina. And as adults, my parents left Argentina, where they had both grown up, for opportunity in the United States, like many immigrants. And I think there were two things that made that innate determination grow in me. As I was growing up as a child in Kansas, my father so clearly favored my sister, who was the smart one, the valedictorian, and I was the dumb jock. What better motivator in life than proving your father wrong? Then when I was 13, my dad died suddenly of a heart attack, and my mom decided to return us all to Argentina. Very bad timing. It was the beginning of the so-called dirty war. The military was about to take over, and they would disappear, kill nearly 30,000 people. I lived in fear every day when I was 14 and 15 years old of being abducted. I would walk to school with a friend in case one of us was grabbed by the military. They would roam the streets in these unmarked cars. And if one of us was grabbed, hopefully the other one could go and tell our parents what had just happened. A 17-year-old close family member of mine was picked up and was tortured for a month and was held in jail in very harsh conditions for nearly a year. And at 14, as the only American citizen in my family, I was lobbying congressional leaders to try to free that person and save her. I remember one morning in Buenos Aires, when I was 14, on my block, I saw blood on the ground and asked my mother what had happened. And she told me that 2 journalists had been killed in front of their house there for trying to tell the truth about what was happening in that country. And in that moment, I was obviously already somewhat crazy as a 14-year-old. I decided I would become a journalist too. It was clear to me that the military was so badly trying to keep people in the dark in Argentina about the magnitude of what was happening in that society that they were willing to kill a lot of people to keep the society ignorant. And I think that day was the first time I saw the power of words and the power of storytelling. We returned to the US not long after that, but faced new challenges. My family went from middle class to working poor. My mother started working as a seamstress. I went to work at 15 to help her pay the bills. After going to a mediocre public high school in Kansas and really not having written a paper longer than 3 pages, or read many books for that matter, I followed my boyfriend to a place that's often ranked #1 as a liberal arts school in this country, Williams College. Many children there had gone to Andover and Exeter and seemed to have written papers from the time that they were in diapers. I told myself, you will not survive 1 year of this, much less 4. I was one of 5 Latinos on the entire campus. But then at some point, I dug deep, and I found that determination. And I ended up graduating with honors and returning to give the convocation a few years ago. I became the youngest person hired at the Wall Street Journal, a business paper, but I focused on what I thought was important, writing about social issues, social justice issues, women, children, the poor, Latinos, immigrants, people who don't get enough ink in this country. And I specialized in fly-on-the-wall reporting, where you drop yourself in the middle of the action and watch that action unfold. And this took me into some pretty interesting places: crack sheds, riot zones, dangerous, tough places. I thought I was lacking in many different qualities, which my husband attests to every night, but determination was not one of them. Ganas, as we Latinos say, or I guess now we women say leaning in, was something I felt I had in abundance. But then a conversation in my kitchen with my house cleaner, Carmen, made me understand real determination. I remember one morning in my kitchen asking Carmen if she was thinking about having any more kids. She was normally a very chatty woman, but when I asked her this question, Carmen went stone silent, and she explained to me that she had left 4 children behind in Guatemala, as she was crying as she was telling me this. She said she was a single mother, and her husband had left her for another woman, and she said that most days she could feed her kids once, maybe twice, but at night her children cried with hunger, and she had nothing to give them. She showed me in my kitchen how she would gently coax her kids to roll over in bed at night, and she would tell them, sleep face down so that your stomach doesn't growl so much. She told me how she had left these kids with their grandma, and she had come north to work in the United States, in Los Angeles, where I live. And she told me that she hadn't seen these children in 12 years. So imagine not seeing your children for that period of time. She said her youngest daughter, she was a year old. She was still breastfeeding when Carmen had walked away from her. I remember being stunned by what she was telling me. Why were women willing to go 2,000 miles away from their home, not knowing when or if they would see their children again? And also, I had been taught, weren't immigrants overwhelmingly men? The shift had begun perhaps first with Caribbean women who came in such large numbers in the 1950s that they outnumbered men coming to this country. And in developing areas, Latin America was the first in 1990 to have women coming here in as large numbers as men. Of the 200 million migrants now circling this globe, half are now women. And in parts of the past decade, 3/4 of those migrating from the Philippines, from Indonesia, are women, not men. Carmen was the new face of migrants coming to the United States. And in my kitchen that morning, I wondered, what were the benefits of this? What were the costs? That question launched me on a pretty amazing journey that would take me to Honduras, up the migrant routes through Mexico, and into the homes of these women across the United States. A lot of these women were coming here and taking care of other people's children, but they told me I was not there to see my child take their first step or hear their first words or be there for their quinceañera. I saw that this was incredibly common. In Los Angeles, one study at USC showed that 4 out of every 5 live-in nannies has a child left behind in their home countries. And Save the Children estimates that there are tens of millions of children left behind worldwide, mobility orphans, they call them, 1 million a year from Sri Lanka alone. And so I dug in and I started looking at this issue, and I saw that there was family disintegration throughout Latin America. And this was really changing the face of who's coming now to this country. These single moms had a desire for better opportunities for themselves and for their children. And many of them were coming to flee abusive husbands. And they could see on their television sets that in more developed countries, women had different opportunities than they had. An aging population in the United States, more women going to work outside the home was fueling the need for more caregivers, for domestics, for service workers. So there was opportunity in this country. And today, of the 11 million who are here undocumented, 51% are women and children, not men. They are part of the largest wave of immigration in our nation's history since 1990, and also a wave that has transformed our schools. Today, in our public schools across this country, nearly 1 in 4 children are either immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants. So as I started going into a lot of these women's homes, they all told me the same story. They said, the only way I could walk away from my kids that day, I gave them a promise. I said, mi hijo, this will be 1 or 2 years at the most. What they didn't realize is that life here is a lot tougher than advertised. I know this as the child of immigrants. When folks talk back to people in their home countries, they play up all the good stuff. I'm making $8 an hour. I have a car. What they don't say is I'm working 2 jobs. I'm sleeping 5 hours a night. I'm struggling to pay my biles here, my bills, send money home to my kids every month, save $8,000 I've got to put in the smuggler's hands to bring each of my children north. And so I found that these separations are almost never 1 or 2 years. They typically stretch into 5 or 10 years or even more. And these kids get desperate to be with their moms again, and so they get this idea, well, she's not coming back to me or sending for me, I'm going to go find her. When I started looking at this phenomenon a decade ago, I found that there was a small army of children heading north to the United States, undocumented and alone, from Mexico and Central America. About 48,000 children a year coming in that way about a decade ago. And this has grown phenomenally over the last 2 years. The number of adults coming undocumented has plummeted to a 40-year low. The number of children has surged in the past 2 years. I estimate to more than 100,000 children coming undocumented and without a parent every year today. Some of them are coming to work. Some of them are fleeing abusive situations. And now especially they're fleeing recruitment by gangs, transnational gangs, that tell a child at 9 in El Salvador, you either join up or we kill you or we rape your sister. These gangs have made Honduras and El Salvador have the highest homicide rates in the world. Most of these kids I found were coming to reunify with a parent, and for the Central American kids, 3 out of 4 were coming to find a mom who had left them behind. And so I wrote about this phenomenon through one boy Enrique, whose mother leaves him in Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, and she walks away from Enrique when he's just 5 years old. And he is bewildered by, this is what he looked like shortly in his kindergarten graduation shot, shortly after his mother left him in Honduras with his paternal grandmother. And he's just bewildered by this. I mean, his mother has always been there by his side, morning, afternoon, and night. Suddenly, his mother has disappeared. And he begs his paternal grandmother, ¿Cuándo vuelve mi mami? When is she returning from me? And he goes from being a lonely boy to honestly a pretty troubled adolescent without her by his side. And so after 11 years of not seeing her, this is what he looked like shortly before leaving. He sets off to go find her. And like all these children I've interviewed, he wanted one question answered. Does she really love me? Because she said she was going to return or send for me, and she hasn't. He left with little more than this tiny scrap of paper that he had with his mom's phone number inked on it. Amazing to me on these migrant routes. These kids, they would wrap it in plastic so when they crossed rivers or it rained, that precious number wouldn't smudge. They'd pull it out of the sole of their shoe, the waistband of their jeans where they would hide it. And Enrique has his scrap of paper and he's virtually penniless, so he goes the only way that he can, through Mexico, clinging to the tops and sides of these freight trains that travel up the length of the country. I found that there were thousands of children making this journey in this way each year. The youngest I heard about was 7 years old. So imagine your children at that age going off to school alone, much less traversing 4 countries. And the youngest boy I traveled with was 12-year-old Dennis, coming to find his mother in California. It's an incredible adventure, and it's harrowing beyond anything I could have certainly imagined. Many of these children, they never make it through Mexico. They try many times, and after a series of bad experiences, they end up back in their home countries. And many of them are killed by the train wheels as they travel through Mexico. And really, from the moment that they cross this beautiful river, the Suchiate, from Guatemala into Mexico, they are hunted down like animals all along the way through Mexico. They cross in these balsas. They're hunted down by bandits who operate alongside the rails. This was the most famous immigration checkpoint for a long time in Chiapas in southern Mexico. The authorities would stop the train, try to grab the migrants, including these kids. Your trick was to run around this 3-mile checkpoint and get on the train as it's moving on the other side, elude those immigration agents. There are 3 to 5 swarms of bandits waiting for you, armed with machetes, knives. They will rape you, they will rob you, they will kill you in many cases. I counted a dozen police agencies, corrupt cops in Mexico that target these children, and they would line them up off the train and rob their hats, their shoes, sometimes rape the girls, and deport them to the southern border. Today, the journey has gotten more difficult because the Zetas, the worst narco-trafficking group in Mexico, controls the train tops. They are kidnapping 20,000 Central Americans a year. And these are the faces of people who have disappeared, and they prefer children because they kidnap you and they use that slip of paper to demand ransom from parents in the United States. And they face the train itself. You can't get on these trains at the train station because these children are crossing Mexico illegally. They have to get on and off them as they're moving. Take my word for it, I've done it. This is a lot harder than it seems. The rail bed slants at 45 degrees, made up of huge rocks. The first rail of the ladder would come to these children's waist and higher if that train is banking away from them. So they try to pull themselves up these ladders and make it up on top of these trains. You can see how difficult this is for all migrants, including these children. And I spent a lot of time in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, in this incredible shelter operated by this woman, Olga Sanchez. She has a shelter for people who are mutilated by the trains in Chiapas. It's hard to express what it's like to go into this place. It is rooms filled with people who have lost arms and legs, including this 14-year-old boy, to this freight train. The worst of this journey are the gangsters and the Zetas that control the train tops. They would go from car to car. I'd watch them surround a group of migrants and tell them, your money or your life. This happened to Enrique one night. He's on top of this car. 6 of these gangsters creep up the 2 ladders, and they throw him face down on top of that train and start beating his face with a wooden club. And they shatter his teeth. They strip his clothes. They see he has no money, so they beat him harder, and they start to strangle him with a bit of his own clothing. He's trying to pull this away from his throat and at the same time buffer those blows coming at his face. And he hears one of these thugs yell out, "Throw him off the train." He's thinking, I'm gonna die. My mom will have no idea what happened to me. Suddenly, the train jostles, that noose loosens for a moment. Enrique is able to get to his knees and stand and flings himself off this moving freight train, going 40 miles an hour. When he finally comes to, all they've left him are his underwear. He's covered in blood. His eyes are filled with blood. And these women see him in this little town and press coins into his hand and tell him, go home, you're gonna die trying to do this. And he says, I can't, I have to reach my mother. I saw that determination, that incredible determination, when I did this journey myself. I met Enrique. He had already made it to Nuevo Laredo and was very moved by what these kids went through. And so I spent a couple of weeks with him and wanted to show what this journey was like for these children and some women on the train. And so I spent a couple of weeks with him, tagging alongside him. He told me everywhere he had been on these 8 attempts he had made to get through Mexico. And I went to Honduras and did the journey step by step, exactly as he had done it a few weeks before. I would travel 1,600 miles, roughly half of that on top of 7 freight trains. I did take a lot of precautions. I'm not totally crazy. But despite the safety nets I tried to build into this ride, it was a high-stakes ride. I mean, I remember my first train ride. There were about 100 migrants on top of this train and me. The ones closest to the locomotive started screaming back a warning, Rama. Couldn't hear them. This train is incredibly loud. I'm holding on with both hands because the train pitches violently from side to side. I didn't hear the warning, and a huge branch hit me right in the face, sent me sprawling back, almost off this train. I grabbed onto the rail on the side and pulled myself back up on top. When this train finally stopped the next day, a kid in the car behind me said another child with him had been swiped off by the same branch and was probably dead because as the trains move forward, they pull, the air sucks under the wheels and pulls you into the wheels. I did this journey twice, 3 months each time. And yes, I had many nightmares when I returned to my house in Los Angeles, a case of post-traumatic stress. I was tense and I felt filthy and in fear of being robbed or beaten or raped many days on that train. In the South, the heat is enormous. I couldn't touch the train. It would burn my hands. And in the North, it's so cold, migrants, they freeze to death on top of these trains. And yet I knew what I had been through was 1% of what these children go through. I'd get off that train when it would stop. I'd go eat a warm meal and sleep in a real bed. For Enrique and these other migrants, they had to beg, like this boy is doing, for whatever food they could get. Enrique described going 2 days without 1 drop of water. He said, I felt like my throat was swelling shut. And I remember how he would tell me he would sleep in sewage culverts to hide from the immigration authorities. Children would sleep in trees in the South to protect themselves from predatory animals. There was amazing determination to get north, to be in their mother's arms. They were aided by many Mexicans, especially women along the way, who understood, who had lived their own separations from children or from parents. Chiapas is the heart of darkness, but Veracruz was another matter in south central Mexico. There, where there was a curve in the tracks, some reason that train had to slow down. There would be these little towns, and when they heard the whistle of the train, 10, 20, 30 people I would watch rush out of their homes with bundles of food in their arms, and they'd wave and smile and shout out to these migrants on top of the train. And I'd watch them throw bread. I watched them throw whatever fruit was in season. For Enrique, they pummeled him with pineapples. For me, they were pummeling me with large bunches of bananas. If they didn't have any food to give, they would give bottles of tap water like they're doing here. And if they didn't have that, they would line up. I'd watch in these little towns, and they would give a silent prayer for these migrants as they passed by on the trains. What so amazed me was these are the poorest Mexicans along the rails, but they're giving to total strangers from other countries who they'll never see again. And they told me they did this because it was the Christian thing to do. It was the right thing to do. It was what Jesus would do if he were standing in their shoes. I think Maria most personified this. Well, Maria told me that she was way, way older than 100, and I don't normally give her the number because it just totally blows her cred. But she said that during the Mexican Revolution, she was so hungry she would eat the bark of the plantain tree in her front yard. Her hands looked like this, gnarled with age, but she'd force them to make little bags with tortilla, salsa, whatever she had. And when she heard that whistle, she would hand all these bags to her 70-year-old daughter, 70, Soledad, who would run down that rocky slope and heave these up to the migrants on top of the train. I'll always remember what Maria told me that day. She said, if I have one tortilla, I will give half away. I know God will bring me more. I've written about migrants for 20 years or more now, but I didn't understand until this journey the desperation driving so many of these women out of places like Honduras, where there's 44% unemployment and subemployment. And ladies, the newspaper ads tell you, they spell it out in Honduras, if you're 28 years or older, don't even bother applying for a job. You're too old. I think the woman who most brought this home for me was Leti Isabela Mejia Yanes. I met her when she was trying to get through Mexico. She was from Honduras, and she told me that she had 3 children there, and all she could give them to eat every day was 2 pieces of bread and a watery cup of coffee. Her 1-year-old son, Daniel, he got 1 piece of bread and breast milk. And she told me the story so many women told me in Honduras. At night, when her kids started crying with hunger, she would fill this big glass with water, stir in a teaspoon of sugar, a dollop of tortilla dough, whatever she could give them to fill their bellies with something. And she told her children, I'm going north. I can't take this anymore. Her 9-year-old son, Marvin, told her, Mommy, don't go. I already know how to write my name. I'll quit school. I'm going to help you work. She said no. She wanted to give them the gift of hope. Letty stumbled trying to get on one of these freight trains a few weeks before I met her. And I think, as you can see, she lost both of her legs in that quest. When I had that conversation now some time ago with my house cleaner, I was judgmental. Carmen could hear it in the tone of my voice. What I was thinking, but I wasn't explicitly saying, was, what kind of a crappy mother walks away from her children? I couldn't understand it. But I came to understand these choices when I saw the consequences for children whose moms decide to stay in places like Honduras. In Enrique's neighborhood, a lot of those kids work in this dump. These trash trucks would rumble up to the top. I would watch women and children fight for position on either side of these trucks as the trash would slide down, feverishly trying to pick out bits of tin, plastic, anything that they could sell. Some of these trucks were coming from a local hospital. I won't spell it out, we've all just had breakfast. But I was standing in this stinking soup. There was the swirling black cloud of vultures above us, defecating on everyone below. This was a scene out of the Inferno. I mean, I've worked a long time as a reporter, never been in a place where I felt like I couldn't breathe. And yet there was a 6-year-old boy working in this dump that day, as there often is, and I watched him reach into this muck and pull out a bit of bread and start to eat it. Many women and children have enormous drive to do better. Enrique made 8 attempts. He traveled 122 days and 12,000 miles in what can only be described as a modern-day odyssey that these children go on. Women immigrants, with their ganas, have done so much for this country. They've taken care of this nation's children. They have given them the love that they couldn't shower on their own children. They have taken care of the elderly. In fact, Lourdes, Enrique's mom, has done both of those things. And they've allowed so many American women the freedom to work outside the home and to blossom professionally. Women, all migrants, have contributed in other ways. They've done jobs Americans honestly don't want to do. They've helped spur our $13 trillion economy. They've prevented many businesses from closing or outsourcing jobs if they would have had to pay higher wages to American workers. And they've reduced the cost of 5% of all goods and services that all of us in this country buy. And some low-wage occupations, half of all hours worked nationwide, are by immigrant women. But there have been clear consequences, too. Let's not forget that. Not just for the 1 in 14 Americans, mostly African Americans and Latinos who don't have a high school degree, and have seen their wages depressed in some industries because of the influx of immigrants. But there have been consequences for these migrant women and the children too. It's absolutely true. If you come here, you can send money back. Your kids will eat, and they'll study past the 6th grade, which is all Gottman, my house cleaner, was able to do. But it's also true that after years apart, and a study here at Harvard showed that 85% of children are separated from a parent in the process of coming to the United States, you know, there's a little honeymoon, and then it all goes south because these kids resent and walk up to the line of hating their mothers for leaving them for 10 years. They feel abandoned by their moms. And 201, and I've interviewed hundreds of them, they tell me, I would have rather been hungry, but had my mom by my side to love and protect me than being in the US, sending the Nike shoes, the soccer balls, yeah, even the money to eat. They are very hard on their moms. I watched a boy in Los Angeles at a high school say to his mom's face, even a dog doesn't leave its litter. And I think what's very hard is these moms are losing what's most important to them, the love of their children. Too often, these kids are more likely to join gangs, whether in Central America and Mexico, or here in the United States, or get pregnant with an older man to get out of these heavily conflicted homes. Studies show these children have higher levels of depression, lower academic levels, greater physical and emotional problems for all of these children who are left behind. Drug abuse is also more common. Enrique himself turned to sniffing glue in Honduras to fill that void of not having his mom there, and that's an addiction he's found hard to leave behind. Many others today are going to discuss what can help these women and children progress in the United States. I just know that for women on these train routes and in Central America and Mexico, they don't see a solution in doing more of the same of what we've done for 3 decades. More guest worker programs, triple-layer walls, and even pathways to citizenship. They say we need to address this exodus of women at its source in terms of helping create jobs in really what are 4 countries that are sending 74% of the migrants who are coming here illegally. They say we need a foreign policy, if we're really serious about this, that brings all the tools we have in our toolbox, microloans, trade policies that allow more goods in from these 4 countries. Whoops, here we go. And help in promoting education for girls, promoting family planning in many of these countries. We know that Mexico has done this and reduced the number of children from nearly 7 to 2 in a short amount of time. Promoting more democratic governments in places like that are willing to redistribute the wealth instead of regimes like the one installed by the coup in Honduras. I understand that advocating to spend money to create jobs south of our border, this is not going to be a wildly popular concept right now, I get that. But just take the billions we're already spending on useless endeavors like this, $2.5 billion, $6.5 billion to maintain it over 20 years, and put that into targeted economic development. Enrique's journey, I've been blessed that it's been adopted among the most popular freshman reads on college and high school campuses, about 60 universities and campuses. And I've seen students and readers really embrace this approach of doing and start doing amazing things. They have started microloan programs. They have contributed to others. They have built schools and water systems throughout Mexico and Central America. They have tried to improve the economic opportunities for these women in their home countries. We need to make it more possible for women to stay at home where they would rather be. This comes as a great shock to college students. They think everyone wants to be in America. But no, most migrants would rather live with everything that they know and love. These women told me it wouldn't take a lot. If they could feed their kids, send them to school, or even have the hope of sending them to school, they told me they wouldn't leave. I think these changes will be slow and difficult. But if we bring real determination, real ganas, the kind I saw amongst the migrants on top of this train, to making these changes, I have no doubt that we can accomplish this. Thank you.